How does drayage work? This is a great question, Ben. I know you do some work in drayage. I've had a fair amount of exposure to it. So let's talk about example. I want to talk about the inbound and the outbound. I guess the import and the export version of drayage. So in a nutshell, your customer will either have a container. I'm going to go with the ship version here, okay? Coming into a port. They either have a container arriving or departing, and it's going to either come in or out through a port. I'll let you talk about the rail in a minute here. And that container coming in or out, you're not the one that is booking that on a ship, right? That's usually done through a freight forwarder. What your job is as a broker is to find them that transportation, either to get that container loaded into the port or picked up from the port, right? So in a nutshell, let's go with a container coming inbound, right? Your customer says, hey, I've got a container coming into the port of, I don't know, Savannah, we'll go with, okay? So your job as a broker is to find a truck to go to the port. They're either going to have their own chassis, so privately owned, or they're going to rent or lease a chassis. They're going to check in, wait in line, pick up the container, deliver it either to a warehouse to get cross-docked or to its final destination, and then go back and return that container. And possibly the chassis if they leased it. What else you got to go more in depth on that?
So correct. The process, and it's the same whether it's a boat or a railroad. Cargo coming in is an import, right? So you got a carrier that is either going to take their own chassis or grab a pool chassis is what they're referred to. There's a fee every day for that chassis. They're going to go and grab the loaded container. They will take it to a receiver. They will deliver the cargo in the container and return the empty container, right? Two things that are important. You have time windows on imports, which means if you do not pick it up by the LFD or the last free day, the carrier incurs storage charges at roughly $200 a day, whether it's at a port or a railroad, and you have about 2 days of free to pick it up.
And the reason for those fees, you are taking up valuable space, limited valuable space in their yard.
Always. So no matter where this container is, and the difference in drayage is there's a cost to everything you do. So there's a cost to the chassis. There's a cost if the container does not get pulled out. In full truckload, if you don't pick up a load, like that's it. Like there's no fee or fine. Containers are sitting there on railroad property. Other containers are coming in. They need to get those out. So there's a fee if you don't get it out. That's paid by the carrier or the broker in some cases. So you need to know this when you're going to start working in drayage, that you could be paying for fees if you don't do what you said you could do by that time. The second big difference is when you're returning an empty container from an import, if you do not get it in a certain time. Let's say your carrier just leaves it at their yard and forgets about it for whatever reason. That carrier incurs fees every single day past the certain time window that your carrier or you as the broker could be liable for. So there are other things you need to track other than just the cargo and delivering it. You need to sometimes be aware which chassis is used, whether or not the containers are returned in time, and whether or not they're pulled out in time. Those are the big differentials between full truckload and imports. Export's just the opposite. Like you grab an empty container, you get it loaded at a shipper, and then you return the loaded container to either a railroad or a port within a window, which is your ERD, earliest return date, and you have the other side of that window, which is your cutoff date. That's for an export. So where you have a window to get them out, you always have a window to get them back in.
One final thing I want to add in here is that because of the nature of drayage and how specific it is, there are drayage carriers that specialize in that, right? They could be either just power only or they own their own chassis, which obviously is going to save them money and be it's going to make their bottom line stronger, right? They don't have to spend money to rent a chassis. Because if you're renting a chassis or leasing a chassis from another company, that company is making a profit just off that rental.
Correct.
Right? And they have to spend money to reposition their chassis where they're desired.
Yes. And in addition to that, right, like some other concerns are not only are there charges with that, but just being aware of where those are. And to your point, like, those are the big differentials.
Yep.